As we're coming to the end of our Forever Home build, where we have just been talking about the science of the construction and dynamics in the house, we also want to talk about the science of your appliances. So today we are going to be talking about our cooking and cleaning appliances here in the kitchen. In a separate video, we will talk about the laundry.
It really comes down to picking the raw materials that will ultimately carry out whatever their intended purpose are. So you may see in some respects, when you go down into lower price points, you think to yourself, well, I can get something that's a bit more affordable, but ultimately they'll start to swap out some of the more metal components for things like plastics and polyurethanes because they do cut costs. But ultimately, what you'll notice across the industry, a lot of our appliances today only last us about 5 to 7 years. One of the biggest foundations for Miele is built for a 20-year life expectancy. That actually requires a fairly exhaustive process in terms of testing and ensuring that the consistency is there. If you do a bit of research, you do a bit of deep dive into it, one of the things that really encourages me is that phrase that we all use. We say, well, they don't make them like they used to. Well, with Miele, we actually make them precisely like we used to. We test them exactly like we used to because we know that that's a common pain point for everybody globally, worldwide, and not just in the appliance industry, but almost every facet of how we consume products.
So right here we have all of the things that I use to cook the food in my home. And let's talk big picture real quick, because really when it comes to cooking in your home, there are two methods. You've got gas or electric. I've always cooked with gas. I love cooking with gas. I ate the marketing. I like the high heat that it brings. The flames feel exciting and dangerous, but it ended up not being the right decision for our family, and I'll tell you why. Gas, we now know, creates a lot of chemistry in your home, and two of the major things that are coming off of it are NOs and carbon monoxide. So you've got this nitric oxide, which can definitely trigger and cause asthma issues, especially if you do not have a hood that is venting to the outside. Which you want even if you are in the electric realm of cooking appliances. But for gas, it was a real heartbreaker for me. When we were building our house, one of the first things I bought was a gas cooktop stove. I was so excited. It sat in a box there for like a year and a half until we came to the really tough decision and realization that we really needed to go all electric. The other thing with a new build is we would have had to plumb in a gas line straight from the street all the way back to our house, which is not very close. Our home is pretty far back from the road. So there was that cost, and then the cost of just keeping it going, and then the heartache of having those costs associated with only one thing in our home that would need gas. But then I learned why the electric realm can be superior. And now let's dive into the electric realm and its two divergent tactics. So what we have here is actually an induction cooktop. Sometimes electric cooktops have the coils above, and sometimes they have the coils below with a really pretty glass surface. Here we have a glass surface, but below is not an electric coil. What it is it's an induction, which is a magnet. Give me the right words to say.
So an induction cooktop in and of itself really consists of an induction circuit, which is the cooking zone that you would place your pot or pan on. Underneath of that is an insulated ferrite material. It's really just a fancy word for a metal that consists of some iron component to it. And what that iron component with that induction coil will do is act as essentially, let's say, an open plug. To actually plug something into that outlet, you would place an induction capable pot or pan. Now, 10 years ago, that was something that was probably a little bit outside the realm of most people. But if you go into any outlet, any store, you'll start to notice that of the cooktop surfaces that are appropriate for that cookware, induction is nearly on all of them these days. And it doesn't come with some astronomical price like it would have in years past. So once you connect that cooking surface onto the cooktop, what essentially happens is you complete a circuit. That circuit then starts to transfer energy. The technical term for that is actually an eddy current. And an eddy current is a fancy way of saying that the molecules inside the base of your pan start to vibrate at very high speeds. That vibration of high speeds in the molecules creates a friction between those molecules, which translates to heat. The heat, of course, then is absorbed into whatever you have in your pot or pan, and you get instantaneous results. Now, beyond the fact that, of course, this gives you incredible efficiency, also consider that the cooktop surface itself is only really activating in the area where, of course, you completed the circuit, which means that immediately outside the pot or pan, there is no heat transfer. It's not like a radiant electric burner where the entirety of the zone heats up and the pot or pan just absorbs the heat and that's how it cooks. Something that is nearly 99% efficient in terms of completing a circuit and then having that circuit translate into energy means that you can achieve rolling boils in mere fractions of the time it would take you with any other type of heat source.
So as you can see, it's a complicated system, but it really, really works. It works so fast that I am actually having to relearn how to cook with this. And would I go back? No.
People think, oh, I can see the flame, so I can control it better. The reality is induction offers you a considerable amount of better control, but more than that, it offers you consistent control. The temperature of the room doesn't alter or influence how the flame will affect a pan. There's so many different variants with gas in terms of the line, the consistency, how much air is being introduced. And all of these variables are not things that you control simply by turning the knob left and right.
You know, I'm just going to say this out to Miele. I would love more instructional videos on this cooktop because one of the things I keep nearby for all of my appliances is the instruction manual, because literally all of these appliances have features that I know I'm not even using because they are super engineered and super smart.
Miele makes the electronics that goes into our machines. It's not shopped out to, normally either Asia or South America is where almost every brand gets their electronics. In fact, everything we really consume, that's where it comes from. With Miele, we make our own electronics at our headquarters in Gütersloh, Germany. Most of the time that we see a mechanical issue occur with any appliance and we're calling for service because, oh, this fan's making noise, this belt isn't right, or it's humming, it's not performing, we're actually calling and complaining about a symptom. The cause of the problem is 70% of the time an electronic fault, an electronic issue. So with Miele, there are times where you'll notice little things that other brands might not have. In particular for that, a monitoring system and a fan to ensure that the board itself doesn't overheat, because if it does, you'll start getting, you could have complete, appliance failure, but on the probably more conservative side, you'll start to get some really bad inconsistencies in terms of the circuit performance. So you're going to want to make sure that each zone has the ability to do precisely what it's supposed to all the time.
This cooktop also has a timer built into it, which is really handy when you are doing multiple things and children are screaming at you and your husband needs you. And if you notice, this cooktop is 36 inches wide, and the other cooking elements below are actually smaller. So it gave me a little bit of more room for spice drawers and just easy access of things that you need when you're cooking. The Miele induction cooktop that we went with has 5 different cooking zones, including this twin booster cooking zone where I can put out a full griddle, which I really love. Mentioning my kids, I have littles who are getting taller and taller and closer to the cooktop every day. This is another reason why we really prefer the induction cooktop, because boop, 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 little buttons get pressed.
One of the things that you may notice, you'll hear a buzzing sound. The buzzing sound is normally one of 2 things. One is you might not have as much ferrous material, which is, of course, that iron-based material that's going to meet up with the induction cooktop surface. The higher quality of the pot or pan that you're using, the less buzzing that you'll hear, but not always. You have to do a bit of research sometimes, which is to say some really high-quality pots or pans actually have 2 different bottoms, if you will. One is the bottom that physically touches the cooktop. But then inside of that, there's actually a small gap of room. This is an area where hot air can start to collect. They think that it's a more efficient way of cooking. Now, whether it is or isn't is actually a little bit difficult to determine. But what can occur is you can actually hear a slight buzzing because as the molecules are starting to move about, there's a hollow echo chamber.
The other thing that I really love about this cooking station and this induction cooktop is its super flat surface because, let me show you. If you're like me, you might have other cooking devices. I can put this cooking device right on top of this surface and I am going to get all the benefit of my hood. Additionally, if your oven, your warming drawer, your other cooking elements are not below your range hood, what are you doing? You might be doing something fun and fancy that you've seen in a magazine. Your kitchen designer, if you have one, might be like, no, a double stack oven is great over here. But let me show you what I did. So moving down, what looks like just one oven is actually a warming drawer and then an oven. Usually this combo does not happen. In fact, I had a hard time getting examples of it working. But the good thing is it does work, it can work. You will notice that our cooktop is raised by about 3/4 of an inch up here. So the warming drawer, it's just spring loaded and opens right up. It's got probably 4 or 5 inches of depth inside and all of your controls are right on top. So you can set a duration from 1 to 4 hours. You can actually do slow cooker cooking in here, which I have done. It's awesome. Ribs are super tender.
Slow cooking. This is cooking for very long periods of time at lower temperatures. This is particularly beneficial when you want to do items of food, let's say, like proteins where you want to render fat. You want it to really start to go from being a hardened element within the protein to starting to become gelatinous until it liquefies. But beyond that, of course, you can do a litany of different things by ultimately utilizing lower temperatures. For a lot of people who want a roast, let's say, to be consistent from end to end, from top to bottom, it really has to be done with lower temperatures over longer times. If you consider for a moment, let's say I wanted to do a beef tenderloin in a traditional convection oven. What I really do is I start to cook the oven at 450 degrees and the air all around that beef tenderloin is going to be about 450. But I only want the centermost item to be, let's say 140 degrees is my definition of medium rare. The center might get to 140 degrees because I'm using a thermometer or a roast probe, but the ends are not. They've been exposed to greater heat because, of course, where is the heat hitting first? It's always hitting the outside and it's hitting the ends. So when I take it out of the oven and I go to slice it up to serve to everyone, you can be one of the people at the end who's probably getting something closer to medium well. And then as you move to the center, the lucky few who got that center cut are getting medium rare.
The menu can also allow for warming plates and cups for parties, or when your husband is out working late and you've got to get the kids to bed, but you still want to keep his dinner warm, you pop it in the warming drawer and it's lovely.
A lot of people will complain that their coffee gets cold really quick or that the coffee maker doesn't get hot enough. Most coffee makers do get hot enough. The problem is that we have this, let's say, 120 degree coffee. And then I take a mug out of my cabinet and how warm or cold is that mug? On a good side, it should be about room temperature. So if I'm pouring 120 degrees into a 73 degree mug, what's the reality that I'm going to be tasting anything near the temperature that was prescribed? And the same effect can really be made for anything, because if I'm serving my hot food right out of the oven or right off the cooktop and I put it onto a cold plate, the reality is I'm going to start having some varied results. Sometimes that can even be humidity that builds up. So something that should have a crisp starts getting soggy, or something that you just simply wanted everyone to enjoy a certain way certainly is going to be vastly different than what you intended.
We're still getting used to it because the other day, my husband was trying to be nice to me and Corbett left a plate in there for me, and we didn't find it until the morning after. Sadly, the little plate of food had totally desiccated, and so the shrimp were like these tiny little crunchy things. So be careful. If your entire system is as quiet as ours, you just might leave things on overnight.
One of the advantages to the installation you have with your warming drawer is actually the fact that you have a Miele cooktop. I say that because our induction cooktops are actually more insulated than nearly any brand in the industry today. The reason that that becomes somewhat relevant to our conversation is because other brands that don't insulate the bottom of the cooktop require a much larger variance in terms of the distance to any appliance below. And it's not just appliances. That can also be a utensil drawer or anything else. But for you, of course, you have the benefit of having this well-insulated cooktop above, so it won't affect anything you're doing inside the warming drawer. The warming drawer for Miele really almost is cheating it when you think about it in the competitive landscape. The reason for that is the warming drawer you have is really a convection system. When you activate the Miele warming drawer, you're actually getting a rotation of air throughout the cavity, and it directs itself from the back to the front, and then it is directed and guided down the front of the appliance through the bottom, and it comes back in a large circle. So it's just going to keep rotating just like that. As it reaches the back, that's where it is exposed to a heating element, which gives it its obviously heat as it continues to go around.
So my other sous chef here in the appliance realm is my oven. This oven, again, I like need to spend some more time with the manual because it has all kinds of tricks up its sleeve.
We have what's known as Master Chef. And there's a lot of brands on the market today that will offer something that seems like a food-driven menu system, but ultimately Miele is the only one that really does this in a highly sophisticated way, which is to say, because we made the electronics and because we made all the mechanical components, we can manipulate the electronics to really guide how the machine operates. So if I choose one of those, let's say we go back to that beef tenderloin that we were talking about earlier. If I utilize the roast probe, I'm going to, of course, plug that into the center of the meat. I'm then going to tell the machine that I want to do Master Chef. I would like to do meat. Then I choose beef tenderloin. And of course, it will then ask me how I'd like to prescribe the finish. So I tell it I want it to be medium rare. And from there, I can even override. Because if my preference of medium rare is different than what Miele says is defined as medium rare, you have the full capability to do that. Once you do that, though, the machine takes over and there's not a lot of guesswork to do. In this particular instance, it goes into a searing stage where all of the heating elements come on at once to envelop that meat in complete heat. By doing that, you essentially will have some facsimile of a searing stage. The searing stage sears the meat really nice on the outside so that all the juices maintain in it. Then, of course, it will begin the cooking process, and where it really becomes even more impressive, especially for those who are interested in energy efficiency, is that Miele will utilize something called residual heat utilization. That is to say that once the oven understands that it's getting close to the core temperature that you've prescribed, it will shut the oven off, knowing that there's enough hot air left inside of the cavity to achieve the rest of the cooking. The machine will automatically cut off to ensure you don't have overcooking, but also that you didn't have to expend more energy than necessary. This is in a very big contrast to other brands in the market who will literally power the machine until the moment you've hit the temperature you tell it to. But of course, once that occurs, you have to be very fast reacting to ensure you don't get overcooking. But beyond that, you also probably utilized a considerable amount of wasted energy, because the first thing you're going to do is take all of that usable heat that's in the cavity, open the door to retrieve the food, and now it's all lost.
Not only do you have all the different kind of operating modes, which kind of come standard, you also have this Master Chef mode, which helps you identify the different things you're gonna cook. And for example, in my house, we love cooking pizza. So we're gonna make pizza. Is it fresh, frozen, oven ready, stromboli? Wait, there's one more option. It's a calzone. Well, let's do a stromboli. And the Stromboli then says, would you like it to be a soft crust or a crispy crust? I love a crispy crust. Okay, they're gonna recommend the temperature. You can adjust it if you like it a little bit different. And it's gonna start preheating the appliance and tell you to use the rack and on shelf too. I love it. I love all the information that it gives you. So let's take a little look inside this super smart oven. Inside, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rack placements. I have already destroyed this oven numerous times with food, and it is super easy to clean up. You can see how beautiful it is. I use cast iron, so I'm often reseasoning them, and that's very, very high heat and a lot of oil inside, and literally this cleans up in a snap.
Now, in particular, the convection oven you have is by no means an ordinary convection oven. Like just about everything that Miele makes, we've really put a lot of emphasis into the details. We'll start by talking about the convection system. The fan, when it kicks on, is not going to direct air towards the food. If you think about it, while that was the American traditional convection system for a very long time, it's also the reason that we had our bakers had to babysit the oven and start rotating things around very frequently. Because what Miele does is inherently different, you get more consistent results. So to back up, if the fan forces hot air forward into the oven, whatever's right in front of the fan is going to heat up a lot faster than the things that are obviously further from the fan. What Miele utilizes is a convection system which draws the air through the back of the unit. You have a really nice, robust air circuit occurring all in the cavity, which envelops all of the food very evenly, does it very rapidly, and of course, ensures that you're not going to have to keep turning the food every 20 or 30 minutes like you would have in the past.
The other thing, you might be thinking, gosh, I don't know if I could ever have that oven because I'm an American and I like big, giant ovens. Trust me, I'm used to that as well.
So in terms of sizing, Miele is, I would say, a little unique in this respect. A lot of our sizing you'll see in terms of your home appliances will be 24 inches. Now, for most Americans growing up, we always thought bigger is better. And there's always going to be the universal, probably language of seeing a 30-inch wall oven and thinking that that's just what a wall oven is. But the reality is, first and foremost, a 24-inch appliance is probably more reflective of what American households are today. We don't have families of 7, 8, 9 children anymore. We have 2 to 3 kids at most. And for most of us, we can well suffice with just having that 24-inch footprint, which also leaves us more adaptability, more usage of the space for other needs. And if you did have the selection, you said, I need to go with the 30-inch, Miele does offer that for the North American market. But of course, because we're a global company, we offer 60 centimeter or 24-inch appliances in so many different variations. And ultimately, it's not just about flexibility in terms of the space, but also consider when you're heating up a 24-inch oven cavity, it's going to do it a lot faster than a 30-inch just because physically the cubic space that you're trying to fill with hot air is a lot more concise.
The other thing we really like to do is have 2 ovens in this country. And I have actually cooked more things in this one oven than I have in the double oven situation at my in-laws' house. With these 5 racks, there's nothing I haven't been able to get in here. I have cooked a very large bird in here, as we like to do in America, and it cooked just fine. It cooked perfectly. Plus, it also has a little sensor action, so you can plug in your thermometer and make sure that bird is cooked perfectly. Also, in a traditional American oven, you are used to seeing lots and lots of different racks, and then you put your different pans in. Well, Miele has actually solved that problem because they provide you with these awesome cooking pans that I have been using a ton, and they have stayed very, very clean. I do cook often with parchment paper, which also helps for cleanup, but truly these actually don't even need the parchment paper. I'm just lazy.
The design is a lot different than most American brands you see today. One of the big reasons for that is the prevalence of black glass on the front of the unit. Now, while this gives us obviously a sophisticated design that we're not complaining about, the reality of the situation is that's really a happy accident of engineering. Viewing windows at the door of the cavity are particularly necessary because the larger the viewing window, the more of the cavity you can see, which of course means I don't need to open the door anytime that I want to view where the food is at. Kind of thinking back to growing up, and you used to have maybe a cream colored stove in the kitchen that your mom would have to open the door, let all the heat out, and then close it back up. It's significant in terms of how energy inefficient that method was, but it's also a really painstaking item in terms of straining the oven itself, because now remember, it has to work all the way to get back to the temperature it was at, which means it has to do double the output, which means the components are stressed more. And of course, having to get to temperature means how many minutes have you wasted?
And you might think we're done moving down from the warming drawer and the oven, but no, below the oven is actually a series of vents, which we have a whole video on that you can go check out as to why we did that. But basically, it helps bring in the makeup air to capture any contaminants and move them up towards our vent hood and out of my living space. A little note to kitchen designers, and I am not a kitchen designer, but I say this to you with even more encouragement that you can make things work. I mean, this system comes in interesting components, and we put it together and made it work. And it looks great, and it functions well, and it's all directly under the hood. So I am protecting my family, and you should protect your clients too. So now we are turned around to look at the other side of the trifecta of our cooking and cleaning appliances here in the kitchen. Now, quick word about this dishwasher. It's super simple.
In terms of your habits with the dishes, there's two things that are very important to consider. And they actually work hand in hand. And that is, what type of detergent do I use? And do I put my dishes in clean or dirty? Which sounds kind of funny because this is a machine that's supposed to wash dishes. But we grew up in a different era. And ultimately, what we saw was our parents used to pre-wash and then put things into the dishwasher because they thought, well, I'm putting it in for hygiene, but not for removing soil. Things have changed drastically. And they changed because dishwashers, first and foremost, became better at physically removing the mechanical soiling, meaning all the dirt, debris, even caked on items. They do this because the ability to influence temperature is better, but on top of that, pump systems became far more efficient, so we can affect the other items that really come into play when it comes into cleaning. I'll give you a little background. There's something called the Sinner Circle. The Sinner Circle is named that for a gentleman named Dr. Sinner. He was a founding member of a corporation called the Henkel Group, and they ultimately did a lot of the foundations of what we understand about cleaning today. What he said of the Sinner Circle was ultimately that you need 4 components whenever you're cleaning with water. Those components are the mechanical action, meaning the actual physical movement that has to occur. You need a specific temperature that will ultimately be appropriate depending on what results or what items you want to clean. You need to allow for a certain amount of time in order for this process to occur. And then you need a chemical component. With a dishwasher, of course, all those 4 components are really important. And in particular, the soap is the one issue that a lot of people have questions about. What should I use? How should I use it? So you want to utilize something that's high efficiency and something that contains enzymes. Enzymes are these highly specific cleaners. Lipase is really great for oils and fats. That's solely what it's capable of cleaning, but it does a really effective job with it. Meanwhile, something like protease is meant to break down proteins. So that's anything you're eating like meat, fish, those type of items, eggs, but there should be a soiling level on your dishes, which means do not rinse your dishes. Don't clean them and then put clean dishes in. Ultimately, with a Miele in particular, you're going to want to just scrape your dishes off, meaning bring it over to the trash can and simply toss off whatever you can with a fork. Anything else needs to be on those dishes. Rinsing your dishes for, let's say, 10 minutes, you're wasting 20 gallons of water. Your dishwasher on the heaviest cycle that you have, if it's Energy Star certified, is going to utilize less than 5 or 6 gallons on the high side. So you really want to take advantage of the dishwasher as much as possible and save the water. There's no reason to waste it.
Quick note too, by the way, this really is not a commercial for Miele. This just happens to be what we chose because we really like the engineering and science behind it. I love the science of easy cleaning. It is great to finally let the dishwasher clean dishes, which it is so capable of doing.
A talking point with dishwashers is an Energy Star. Is an Energy Star certified? Certainly, that is a very large consideration. You want to make sure you have an energy efficient dishwasher. Energy Star has a specific criteria in terms of the efficiency level you have to achieve, but also on something called a cleaning index, which is, of course, how much are you still cleaning while you're being efficient. The minimum score to certify your appliance is a 70. And you can imagine when you give someone a minimum, that's what they're going to hit. Almost every manufacturer is going to have a score that hovers somewhere in the low 70s because they knew what they had to hit and they're going to hit it. Meanwhile, you'll find that nearly every Miele appliance that achieves this Energy Star rating is naturally going to gravitate towards the 90s. Now, one of the reasons that we're so energy efficient and so effective at cleaning really comes down to that Miele made electronic once again. So we utilize 2 sensors in every single load that you run. And by the way, you don't have to press a button to activate this. One of the sensors is going to be something called a load sensor. Now, in between different phases within a cycle, let's say one phase equals the water coming into the dishwasher, and then it's circulated by the spray arms. The spray arms move it around, and then once it's finished, let's say removing soiling from your dishes, it's going to go into the sump and be dispelled by the dishwasher. What we'll do is we'll take a measurement of the water that returns into the sump. If there's a lot of water that returns to the sump, that means there wasn't a lot of items for that water to attach to. Meanwhile, if you really load up your dishwasher, not a lot of water returns to the sump, which means that we know that you've loaded your dishes a lot into that particular cycle. But we don't just do how much did you put in, we're also going to determine how dirty the dishes are. So as the water is flowing through in a cycle, we have another measurement in the sump, which is something that most brands refer to as a turbidity sensor. But for Miele, we call it an auto sensor. The reason that we call ours is an auto sensor is because we want to make sure people know it's doing something different than any other brand. First and foremost, to give you an idea of how any of these sensors work in terms of measuring soiling, it's just simply a laser. The laser is sitting there and it's just doing a measurement. And every time the laser is interrupted by a piece of food, debris, soil that comes off the dishes, it takes note of it. However, imagine that sometimes you have suds from the detergent mixing with water, or you have air pockets in the water itself as it's sloshing around. Or perhaps you do a lot of oily dishes, or you do things with a lot of alkaline like milk. Those things can create clouds and misreadings. And ultimately, you'll start to see that every dishwasher on the market thinks that all of your dishes are constantly really filthy. What Miele does is create a diversionary path. So we physically, while all the water is flowing in one direction, we'll take a small amount of it and divert it off. By doing that, you eliminate a lot of those pockets of air, the suds that happen from the detergent, and you don't get the oils and the alkaline because those ultimately travel with the main flow of water. So you get a very, very accurate reading of how dirty the dishes are. And we do this after the pre-rinse. We do it 3 times during the main wash cycle. And we ultimately ensure that we're always going to be using as much as needed, but as little as possible. In fact, we're the only dishwasher on the market today that can not simply add more in terms of the resources you're consuming. We're the only brand where we can consume less, meaning that perhaps your dishes aren't that dirty or the load's not that full. Your cycle won't necessarily always be the same amount of time, which is really unique. In fact, over time, what you'll notice is when you're activating your dishwasher, the times start to change because it starts to average out your particular habits. So the machine will reflect you in particular, but your neighbor with the same dishwasher will have something completely different because his habits are different. Because we do all of this really stringent monitoring, we also have a very good indicator of how to dry dishes effectively. And while most people would say, of course, a dishwasher should wash dishes, it also comes down to other elements. And in particular, drying dishes is probably the next biggest concern. So how we operate is off of what's called a condensation system. And there's really two different drying systems on the dishwasher market. The first one is an exposed heating element, which is exactly what it sounds like. You'll have a heating element that gets hot that then, of course, tries to dry the moisture in the cavity. Now, there's pluses and minuses to everything. One of the big pluses to the exposed heating element is going to be it will be very aggressive in terms of its drying. And a lot of people say it's great for plastics. And it is great for plastics as long as the plastics don't get too close or that you don't drop anything down. For instance, I have a habit where I would say about once a month, I'm going to drop some spatula or ladle down into the cavity while I'm loading or unloading. Imagine though, if it drops down during the wash process and all of a sudden that heating element comes on and I get a melted plastic. We all know that melted plastic is not good. That means we started to release a lot of free radicals and some really not nice things into the dishwasher cavity. And if we think we're achieving hygienic results through cleaning, but we're ultimately exposing ourselves to a lot of not nice carcinogens through the melted plastics, that can be a real big negative. On top of that, the energy consumption goes up considerably with that. The alternative system in terms of drying would be condensation drying. Condensation drying will take a stainless steel tub inside of a dishwasher, and it will use a hot final rinse temperature. That hot final rinse temperature will, of course, then heat up everything inside the cavity. From there, Miele dishwashers will activate a fan and they'll expose air from the room against the outside of the cavity. What we do is we cool down the stainless steel wall very rapidly with room temperature air. And of course, with stainless steel having a higher thermal energy than the actual plates, glass, anything inside the dishwasher, it's going to cool down rapidly. And now all the moisture starts to pick itself over to that cool stainless steel wall. It then cascades down and goes out the drain. And of course, what you're left with is bone dry dishes. The buyer beware isn't always about price. Sometimes it's that we want to take the path of least resistance. And by not doing enough homework, we may be doing something that's counterintuitive to our end expectation. So when we're talking about these condensation drying systems, of course, the final rinse temperature is important. Of course, the cavity and that fan is important. But the other part that is really critical that a lot of other brands will overlook is having an airflow system, which ensures that you're not going to expose the adjacent cabinetry or appliances to humidity or moisture unnecessarily. So in particular, Miele has created its own proprietary airflow system that ultimately ensure that you're not going to have warm moisture start affecting, of course, any raw woods or anything that you have inside the kitchen. But on top of that, you don't want to start getting a buildup of moisture on the underside of your countertop, which can then leach in. So it's really about making sure it's not just the appliance that's doing its job appropriately, but making sure it's accounting for the fact that it's going to go into a real world scenario.
Now, our refrigerator, okay, I feel like refrigerators are the underappreciated appliance in a home because this is the first thing you plug in when you come to the home. It is the thing that you leave on all the time. And when the power goes out, I expect this to still work, you know, hold in that cold for me as long as possible so I don't have to throw everything away. And this is a mighty, mighty fridge. I literally feel it when I open the refrigerator doors. There's this weight, there's a feel to it that makes me happy. Also, there is an ease. The drawers come out super easily. This fridge, as you might notice, is quite large, and it works because it really fits with my family, and it gives me all the capacity I need just in the top for a fridge. All of the control features, oh my gosh, look. We still haven't even, it's so new, we haven't even taken all the things off. All the control features are right up here at the top of the fridge. Little fingers can't get to them. They are for adults. So our fridge also lets us know when it's just a little bit open. And I appreciate that, especially with the little hands that I have in my house. Do you hear that? Please close it. The cold air needs to come back.
You have a refrigerator and you have a freezer. You're going to want to have a compressor for each one. What can occur from time to time, especially if you start to notice buildup, ice, moisture, or anything that's happening in the freezer in particular, that's because you don't have two independent zones. A lot of, let's say, mass market brands, entry level, while you might think that you're saving money on the unit itself, the reality is, like we always say, you kind of get what you pay for. So you're going to have a unit where the temperatures do leach into one another, which you probably say to yourself, oh, who cares? It's cold, it's cold. It's not going to affect that much. But actually, when you get two very different conflicting temperature zones, moisture can really start to happen. Humidity levels start to change drastically. And when that occurs, the humidity levels actually start to constitute themselves into physical water droplets. You're going to notice that some ice crystals will occur. But then if you expand that out, and let's say that over the course of several days, this is happening, you're actually going to notice a need to empty a little channel in the freezer. Sometimes it's a small little indentation, but it's some type of cavity where they actually understand the intention is to collect the water that it will accumulate through this leaching of temperatures. A compressor for each zone is ultimately going to give you the best efficiency and the most predictable results. You need to make sure you do your research. If they don't specifically say that, and in particular, if you notice that your influence of temperature isn't prescribed to each zone, but rather you have a knob to turn, which vaguely describes cold versus not so cold, you're probably looking at something which isn't truly a dedicated zone for each particular area. And ultimately, as good as you are at maintaining all of your appliances, you're really going to be fighting an uphill battle.
The other beautiful thing is that the freezer drawers are drawers. So the cold air that would be sinking and leaving isn't going to do that. And the ice in this ice maker can actually be tuned to the size that you want. And I really prefer small ice, so that's what we're going with. One quick note about this door. Of course, you could put custom cabinets or whatever, and we decided to go with the stainless steel, but look at how close we cut it to here. Just a hair, and watch. Still opens beautifully. I hope you've enjoyed the tour of our appliances in my happy little corner of this house. Thanks again to Jared for sharing all of his information, and stay tuned because we're gonna dive into the laundry corner next. If you're really interested in learning more about the scientifically superior home, do click on this playlist that we are linking here on the screen to dive into more than 170 videos on this house. Like, subscribe, tune in next time.